It is my pleasure to introduce you to the Leader Within webinar series, Bluepoint's 5-part series, which is drawn from our highly regarded workshop of the same name, The Leader Within. Today's webinar, The Emotionally Powerful Leader, will serve as an introduction to leadership emotional intelligence. On March 6th, we will discuss profound personal awareness, which is the foundation for all leadership development. On April 3rd, the master of your own ship, harnessing the power of your mind. On May 1st, real leadership connections, becoming important to people. And on June 12th, influencing others, shining a light that energizes and inspires. We can tell by the number of people on the line today that you are just as excited about this webinar series as we are. And so without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today. Greg Thompson is President of Bluepoint Leadership Development. Greg is a facilitator, coach, and speaker with a passion for developing the greatness in individuals and organizations. He is co-author of 3 books, The Power to Lead, The Leadership Experience, and Unleashed, The Leader as Coach. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Julie. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be your guide in the topic of leadership emotional intelligence here today. Not only is it an incredibly important topic, I also am thrilled to advise you this is the largest audience that we've ever had at a Bluepoint workshop, probably by a factor of about 3. So I'm thrilled that so many of you are keenly interested in this idea of leadership emotional intelligence. As we start the workshop, the seminar, I'd like to pose a question that really sits with many of us who are in the leadership business or in the leadership development business. And the question is this: why do some leaders atrophy while others thrive? Why do some leaders do such excellent work in organizations and others that are extraordinarily talented, very intelligent, simply not thrive and in fact often leave our organizations? When you look around and you see many of us, we'll know these very bright, highly educated leaders who have failed miserably. There's also, when you look around organizations, you'll see a lot of ordinary men and women, quite frankly, probably mostly like the folks, those of us who are on this call here today, ordinary men and women who set out to make a difference in the organization, and they do extraordinary things. What is that difference? So this question, I'd like to suggest, would be a backdrop for all of our discussions as we go through this idea of emotional intelligence here today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the research that emotional intelligence is based upon. We all can take a look at it. It's readily available. But if you look at it, most of it will focus on one thing. What does it take for somebody in an organization to be a star, particularly a leader? What are the various components? What are the various things that contribute to making a person in an organization excel in some way? And if you take this 10-10-80 rule and look at these 3 components, most research will tell us that something like 10% is based on our native IQ, really what we're born with. About 10% of it is based upon our technical skills in some way. And about 80% of it is based on this thing we call emotional intelligence. Now, for the leaders, we think this is particularly important, and you'll hear me use the term LEQ. That's Bluepoint's term for leadership emotional intelligence. The idea that emotions have a big impact on our lives is not new. I mean, if you reflect back right to the Greek philosophers, they spoke about emotions and its influence on humanity and its impact on the way we lived out our lives on a daily basis. Going back about 100 years, one of my favorite quotes from William James, the noted psychologist and philosopher, is this: "The greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings can alter their lives by changing the attitude of the mind." Now, when you think about that, the greatest discovery of any generation is that human beings can alter their lives by changing the attitude of the mind. The real interesting thing, and really quite important thing for leaders, is that it has become increasingly apparent that those of us who set out to lead organizations have this power to change our minds, to put that change in service of the organization, in service of the teams, in service of the people that we seek to lead. the question for all of us is, how can you harness the power of your emotions? How can you take advantage? How can you understand and capitalize on this thing called emotions so that you can lead in a more powerful and a more effective way? Now, I'll tell you one thing right from the very start of this conversation is that there's a significant unfairness in this area of leadership development. And this unfairness is never more apparent than when we look at this idea of leadership emotional intelligence. As leaders, we really are measured by only one thing. We're measured by what other people do. Are other people more engaged, more innovative, more aligned, more committed, more productive because of us in some way? And really, that's the only measure of the leader. And quite frankly, all we get to do is work on ourselves. So while we're measured by what other people do, we need to keep in mind that leadership development is really at its core personal development, and never so more apparent than in the area of leadership emotional intelligence. So what is this thing we call leadership emotional intelligence? It goes by lots of other terms and titles and notations within organizations. You've probably heard of people use the term leadership presence, personal impact, executive maturity, interpersonal effectiveness. It's really called by lots of names, but it's really about this thing about how your emotions are showing up, being used, and being managed as a leader. I particularly like Daniel Goleman's definition. Emotional intelligence is the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others, for motivating ourselves, for managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationships. If you take this at the leadership level, we believe that leaders with a high LEQ are better able to form lasting positive relationships, adapt to changing conditions in their environment, and to be a very positive influence on others, teams, and their organization. In Blue Point, as I mentioned earlier, we coined the term LEQ. And LEQ really denotes this special emotional intelligence associated with leadership. Emotional intelligence is a big topic. When we talk about its application in leadership, we're talking about general emotional intelligence, but we're also talking about those specialized branches of emotional intelligence that apply primarily to leadership. To provide a framework for our conversation, I'm just going to guide you through a very brief history of this idea of emotion and reason and where really the idea and the science of emotional intelligence came from. It starts really back in 1637 with René Descartes. And René Descartes, the name is probably familiar with most of you, one of the early philosophers. And this quote is attributed to him. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. And what Descartes was trying to indicate with this quote was that the thing that described and made humans distinctive is their capacity to reason, their capacity to think, their cognitive ability. And my guess is what he was saying is this is what separated us from the animals. I think, therefore I am, and I am therefore a sentient being. Now, in our story, along comes in 1848 a gentleman by the name of Phineas Gage. Now, Phineas was a foreman for the Burlington Railroad and was working for them driving the railroad through Vermont for about 18 months. Outstanding foreman. It was in the middle of the winter, cold winter. Now, Phineas, very disciplined, was teaching his crew how to drive an iron rod down a hole, and the bottom of the hole had some blasting powder. Now, unfortunately, they had made an error, neglected to put sand between the rod and the blasting powder. And when Phineas pounded that iron rod down that hole, it blew back out of the hole. And unfortunately, this 13-pound tamping iron, 43 inches long, about 1.25 inches across, blew right through his eye and through his brain, seemingly killing him. Now, miraculously, Phineas didn't die. And quite frankly, he healed quite quickly. He was left with a few scars. He had very poor vision in one of his eyes. But to all extents and purposes, he appeared to have healed completely. I'm going to come back to Phineas here in a few moments. Next, take it forward to 1985. Howard Gardner wrote about this theory of multiple intelligence and really sparked a lot of the research community's thinking about intelligence as not being measured as a unidimensional item. Until that point, most of us had focused on intelligence as IQ. And Howard Gardner started us thinking about, well, maybe there are more forms of intelligence. In 1994, Antonio Damasio, the noted author, psychologist, psychiatrist, wrote Descartes' Error. And in it, he wrote that Descartes made an error. It's not simply that we think, therefore we are. Essentially what Damasio said is we think and we feel, therefore we are. His thesis was reason without emotion is neurologically impossible. Reason without emotion is neurologically impossible. And what he did, in fact, is he reflected back and researched the Phineas Gage case, our foreman at the Burlington Railroad. And what he discovered was this, is that after the accident, Phineas was still very intelligent. He still could recite the entire standard operating procedure for the railroad construction. However, he now became moody. He couldn't make decisions. Something changed. He now could no longer interact with other people. He no longer could lead. So what, in fact, Damasio hypothesized was that the iron rod separated and severed the ability of Phineas to make a reasoned decision. It severed the connection between his emotional brain and his rational brain. Daniel Goleman, in fact, has popularized this in this whole idea of emotional intelligence. At its very core, emotional intelligence tells us that there is an emotional part of our brain that is always at work and is really has a major influence on everything that we do. Now, with apologies to all the neuroscientists and neurologists in the audience, I'm going to give you a brief study of the leader's brain. So if you look at the image on your screen now, this is a very, very simplified schematic of the leader's brain. There are three basic components. The brainstem, and the brainstem is where all of these minute electrical charges are consolidated that come in from our senses. They move through to what we call the amygdala. That's the little almond-shaped thing in the middle of our brain, and they go forward up into the neocortex. So the brainstem is really a collector. Now the amygdala is a storehouse of emotional memories and patterns. It's really the amygdala where all the trouble begins. The neocortex is your language setter, is the smart part of your brain, is the reasoning part of your brain. So what happens is these minute signals come up your brainstem, whether or not it's something you feel, taste, smell, whatever these senses occur, create a minute, really jumbled electrical signal, and they come up your brainstem. And from the brainstem, they pass to the amygdala. And it's at the amygdala that it creates an emotional reaction. Now, this is very important because that emotional reaction is created before your neocortex can get itself in gear. The idea of emotional intelligence is this, is if our neocortex and our amygdala can be on good speaking terms, if we don't let the amygdala simply run rampant and run our entire lives, we then have what we call emotional intelligence. So how does this idea of emotional intelligence, LEQ, fit into a leader's development plan? One of the mistakes we make, those of us who are in the leadership development business, one of the big mistakes that we make is trying to assert that leadership emotional intelligence is simply another competency or leadership skill. It really is not. It really is the foundation for all leadership development. Without a strong LEQ, without strong leadership emotional intelligence, all our other efforts are really in vain. Think about the major initiatives that we launch in the area of leadership development. Authenticity, helping leaders develop a quality, highly respected brand. Coaching, influencing other people, being that catalyst to help them increase their performance and accelerate their career. Team leadership, helping teams become innovative and execute well. Communicate not just in a way that allows people to do their work, but communicate in a way that gets people to think and act differently and in concert. Now, if you think of that as our objective as leadership development specialists, leadership emotional intelligence is not just one of those other check marks. Leadership emotional intelligence is the foundation on which all of those competencies sit. So I would suggest that if we look at a particular area like coaching, to try to create a leader who is very coach-like and can have that powerful catalytic impact on others. For somebody to do that through some simple interpersonal skills is a waste of time, unless we also deal with this idea that the foundation of leadership intelligence is a precursor to all of their other development. So if you look at defining what does an emotional intelligent leader look like? What does an emotionally powerful leader look like? Most books set out to describe that leader, set out to describe what are the qualities and characteristics and traits of that leader. I think, however, a better way of determining if a person is an emotionally powerful leader is to look at the behaviors and feelings and qualities of the people that they lead. So I have a question for you on the screen right now. How do you know if your own boss is an emotionally powerful leader? I would suggest there's 4 things. Number 1 is you simply feel good about yourself. This one took me about 20 years to learn as a leader myself. Leadership is not a popularity contest, and it's not my job as a leader to get people to like me. It's my job as a leader to get people to like themselves in my presence. You can tell if you're working for an emotionally powerful leader. It's when you're with them, when you're working with them, when you're talking to them. You not only feel good about them, but you feel good about yourselves in their presence. Number 2, you find yourself engaging in difficult, usually avoided conversations. You just talk at a different level. You have dialogues at a different level. I often ask leaders when I'm speaking to large groups, how many of them are avoiding a conversation that they know if they had it would have a very powerful, positive impact on the relationship with the other person, the work that they do, or maybe even their entire team or organization. Generally speaking, about 80 to 90% of us have such a conversation. We avoid having that conversation. Most times when you press people and you find out why they're avoiding that conversation, it is simply because they don't want to deal with the emotional carnage that's associated with us. Most of us, it's not the topic. It's simply we don't want to deal with our own emotions and the other person's emotional reaction to that. Leaders with a high LEQ have made a habit, and they have the courage to continually both initiate and have those kind of conversations. So it's a big telling behavior and practice that if you find yourself engaging in difficult, usually avoided conversations with this person is probably a leader with a high LEQ. Thirdly, you are inspired, and you're inspired and engaged by this other person. Think about it. You are inspired and energized about your work. Here's the question for all of us. The question is this. As a leader, when you go into the room, is the room better when you enter or better than when you leave? Is it better when you enter? When you enter the room, are people more energized, more pumped, more inspired when you come into the room? Or is the air in the room better when you leave? This is the haunting question for many of us who set out to lead. Fourthly, you feel safe from emotional explosions. How many people do you know in your organization that you just are on tender hooks around them? You just feel you got to walk on eggshells. You know, it's not the explosion we fear. It's not the explosion that does all the damage. Explosions normally erupt very quickly and they pass. It's not the explosions. What it is the concern and the worry about the explosion. Think about this. We walk on tender hooks because we do not want to experience that explosion. How often do we really hear what we need to hear as leaders from others? Now, if we're really honest with ourselves, how many people are holding back, telling us what we really need to know because they fear some kind of an emotional reaction from us that is going to be painful for them? Lastly, if you feel like you're optimistic about the organization's future, you have a natural optimism about the organization's future, you're probably working for an emotionally powerful leader. It's not only just the positive spirit that they have, but it's put into action, that every day you feel you're moving ahead in some way. You are making progress, that something positive is changing in some way. So, what is your LEQ? Wouldn't it be interesting? Wouldn't it be nice to know what your LEQ score is, if there could be such a thing? Well, we have a special offer for you, and here's what the offer is. We have an assessment. It's called the Leadership Emotional Intelligence. It's the LEQ 360. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to offer this assessment to everybody on this call, complimentary. And you'll see the details on the line there is where you sign in to avail yourself of this opportunity. I will put the slide up at the end of our presentations as well. Before you write that down really quickly, you don't need to do so. Julie will send you an email at the end of the webinar giving you that information so you can just sign up there. Why this particular assessment will be useful for you is that it gives you feedback, gives you information on the following 4 webinars. And so we've timed it so that you can, if you avail yourself of the opportunity by the 15th and have it completed before the next webinar, we'll see that it gets emailed to you before that webinar, and so you can use it as a guide at that webinar and the subsequent webinar. So the LEQ, what the LEQ measures is our leadership emotional intelligence on 4 dimensions. The first dimension is this dimension we call personal awareness, understanding yourself in a very intimate way. The next dimension is what we call self-mastery. Self-mastery is this idea of not just letting your emotions run your life, but you running your life as the captain of your own ship. Leadership connections is the ability to make profound, powerful connections with others. And lastly, it's the idea about influencing others. So I'm going to just guide you through a brief discussion on these 4 elements. The following 4 webinars are going to be a much deeper dive into each 4 of these, starting with this idea of personal awareness. 3 elements of personal awareness. Number 1, your emotions. Understanding that you are an emotional creature and that you have pre-programmed emotional responses to a number of things that occur around you. Number 2 is this idea of traits. Whether or not it be your personality, whether or not it be the way that you make decisions, the way that you interact with others. Some things that are very much belief and values driven. There's things that are very unique about you and who you are. And lastly, the item we call triggers. What really creates emotional responses for you? And what are the patterns for you? These patterns of experiencing something, feeling it, and acting on the basis of that feeling. I love this quote from Richard Feynman. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Quite frankly, personal awareness is not easy. I often hear from people that I work with that I'm really keenly interested in learning a lot more about myself. Many times what we discover is that we're not really interested in learning a lot about ourselves. We're really interested in confirming what we already know. I believe it takes a very courageous leader to take an honest look at oneself, to really examine oneself, to look at what is unique, both good and bad, about you as a person and you as a leader. One of the first things we need to do when we look at this idea of self-awareness, personal awareness, is to understand the unique emotions, and that we're always under the spell to some degree. We're always under the influence to some degree of emotions. And emotions are not bad. As we recognize them, as we accept them, they give us information about the world. We recognize them, we accept them, we learn from them. The problem is when we let them hijack our brain. We are designed as humans to allow the amygdala to hijack our brain if that bear is chasing us. We are conditioned as humans to fight or flight in times of emergency. The amygdala takes over. One of the problems is we make a habit of that, and we allow that to happen within organizations and within our leadership roles. I like this quote also from Albert Cooper. A true history of human events would show that a far larger proportion of our acts are the result of sudden impulses and accident than of reason of which we so often boast. There's a Dylan Thomas quote also that brings a lot of this into focus for me. I hold a beast, an angel, and a madman in me, and my inquiry is as to their working, and my problem is their subjugation and victory, downthrow and upheaval, and my effort is their self-expression. Now, that's a pretty complex quote, I will tell you. It's taken me a long time to really understand the subtleties there. I think the most important part of that is when Thomas is telling us that I hold in me an angel and a madman. Like there is parts of me that may be bright and shiny, and there are parts of me that are dark sides as well. And that my role as I live out my life is to learn about myself, the angel and the madman components. When I'm an executive leadership coach and when I'm working with senior executives, the ones that I find are the most successful through the coaching process are the ones that have the courage to do exactly that, are the ones that have the courage to really take that deep look at themselves in some way. What they do is they look at their darker side. They look at the things that they naturally avoid doing. They look at what they really don't like in other people, and they're honest about that. They look at ways they get in their own way. They look at places where they sell themselves out. They look at places where they simply do not tell themselves the truth. When you find yourself doing that level of examination of your traits and characteristics, you really are enhancing your personal awareness. Man's main task in life is to give birth to himself, to become what he potentially is. The most important product of his effort is his own personality. Erich Fromm's thesis here is that as we look, we grow. So as we explore ourselves, it does not stay the same. The more we explore ourselves, the more we develop and grow our personality. Here are what we believe to be the practices of extraordinary leaders in these areas. So if you're looking at what you can do as a leader to really enhance the level of personal awareness, here are 3 things. Number 1, get on the balcony. By that I mean you observe yourself in all kinds of circumstances. Assume you're outside of yourself to some degree, and you're watching how you make decisions, how you interact with people. How did you deal with failure? How did you deal with an insult? How did you deal with a compliment? This means getting on the balcony. Number 2 is embrace your feelings, recognizing that they're okay, natural, and necessary. When you embrace your feelings, they no longer become your enemy. They no longer become something you need to avoid, but something you need to learn from. And thirdly, interpret your reactions. Look at your feeling, thinking, acting patterns. We all have them. We feel, we think, we act. We feel, we think, we act. We do it all day long. What are your habits? What are your patterns? The next dimension is this dimension of self-mastery. Again, a quote that I particularly like is this one. Every time we allow someone to move us with anger, we teach them to be angry. This is from Barry Neil Kaufman. Every time we allow someone to move us with anger, we teach them to be angry. Think about it this way. As we go through our organizational life, we are constantly teaching others in the organization how to push our buttons, our emotional buttons, to get an emotional reaction, to get a reaction of some kind. We do this through the course of our lives. We are constantly teaching people how to pull our strings, how to push our buttons. So what this tells us is that we can teach them another way. We can actually act in such a way that teaches others to change their behavior to us. This is called self-mastery. This is taking control of our own ship. It starts with this idea of impulse control. Do you react immediately to your emotions, or do you make a choice as to how you're going to act, how you're going to react? Look at the newspapers today. The newspapers are littered with stories of very successful men and women, otherwise successful men and women, who have not been able to control their impulses. The newspapers are rife with examples of sexual misconduct and financial mismanagement. When you look at these men and women who are otherwise very successful, who simply couldn't control their own impulses and allowed that to be the destruction of their careers, I find it incredibly sad. Next is this idea of adaptability. Emotionally intelligent leaders recognize that they are wrong to some degree. They simply recognize that they've made good plans, they've set out on a journey, they're going to try to get stuff done, they've planned the project. But what they assume is they are wrong to some degree, and they will stay open to information that allows them to change course, allows them to move, allows them to bob and weave and to get things done. Emotionally unintelligent leaders set course and have a lot of difficulty to change. When you really have self-mastery, you also develop the quality of resilience. You simply don't get stopped by what stops other people. And it really has to do with your stories. Leaders create their stories. The one thing that most neuroscientists agree upon these days is we see the world through stories. We communicate through stories. We actually create stories in our own mind simply to make sense of the world, and we're doing it all day long. So leaders are creating stories. Now, these stories are the things that generate their emotions. Great leaders master their stories. These are the self-stories. These are the stories they tell themselves. They master their stories so they can master their emotions. If someone around you is angry, what's your story about that? Are you the cause? Are you in their story? What are you making up? What kind of story are you making up? A customer rejects your proposal. What story are you making up? Is it a positive story? Is it a negative story? You get a promotion. What story are you making up? Is it all about you, or have other people been part of your story to help you achieve that promotion? We are constantly making up stories all day long. We can control our minds, and we can create stories that generate positive emotions. This is a discipline of the leader with high LEQ. So what happens when we let our emotional patterns be the master? Do we need to be a slave to our emotions? There's a lot of research these days. The Center for Creative Leadership has done outstanding work at looking at what they call the leadership derailers. At Blue Point, we have done as well, and many others have worked in this area. We've really looked at what we believe are the 10 big leadership derailers. These are things that could sabotage our future as leaders. These are things that tend to dramatically limit our potential as leaders. And in many times, if you look around organizations, these are the things that tend to derail otherwise outstanding careers. Now, I have an exercise for you here. Here's what I would ask you to do. As I show you these 10 potential derailers, what I'd ask you to do is to think about a leader in your organization, or a leader you know somewhere that has failed or is failing to some degree, and think about which one of these applies to him or her. Just as you're seeing these come up on the screen, which one of these really applies to the man or woman that you're seeing who is a failed leader or really looks like they're going to be a failed leader? I would be very surprised if you weren't able to pick 1, 2, or 3 of these as items that really come from our emotional mismanagement of ourselves and our potential derailers for us as leaders. Now, here's the haunting part. Every person on this call, to some degree, is likely well described by some of these words. Maybe not in an extreme, but these words probably in some way, these derailers in some way, probably hold some potential if they are left to grow, if they're left to fester, if they're left to develop, if they're left to be part of your brand as a leader, to severely limit your development as a leader, your impact on the organization, and your career in many ways. We all tend, I believe, to overrate our emotional intelligence. If I ask a large audience, and I've done this many times when describing this idea of leadership emotional intelligence, ask them, would they consider themselves to be below average or above average in leadership emotional intelligence? 100% of the audience will put their hand up and say they are above average. Now, that's mathematically impossible. We overrate our emotional intelligence. It's called fundamental attribution error. We tend to view other people as clearly insensitive, competitive, dictatorial, arrogant, aloof, critical, explosive, negative, selfish, closed. We have no trouble branding other people with these words. The leader with great emotional intelligence is honest with himself or herself and looks for these within their own work and within their own personality. Resilience changes everything. Organization-like leading today is incredibly difficult. Our organizations are complex, chaotic, ever-changing. The demographics are difficult. Leading today is both exciting and very, very challenging. Uncertainty is a constant companion for the leader today. Resilience comes from having a strong leadership emotional intelligence as well. When you can master your emotions, you're strong enough to bend. You don't have to always break. You don't always have to win. You choose when you're going to bend. You choose when you're going to do battle. You're going to choose when you stand strong. It's going to be on the basis of an intentional decision as opposed to an emotional reaction. Here are 3 practices of extraordinary leaders in this area of self-mastery. When I talk about practices, I would encourage you to think of these as habits. These are things that every one of us can do, every one of us can do every day. The habit of pause and reflecting, just stopping. Get in the habit of not reacting in the moment, but taking even a split second and say, okay, what's really going on here? What's really happening? This is an important practice for the mature leader. Consider your options. Always be thinking, okay, what is the next best step for me to take? Not what's the automatic step. What's the next best thing I can do for me as a leader, for the person with whom I'm interacting, for my team, for my organization, for my customer? And then direct yourself. Get in the habit of being the master, the captain of your ship. Choose your action or reaction. Accept the emotion. Accept the fact that it is very powerful. Accept that it may be driving you in a certain direction, but you will choose your reaction or action. The third dimension is a dimension we call leadership connections, the ability to really make a connection with somebody else. 3 elements of this. Number 1 is empathy. And this really is seeing what it is actually like to be another person. Transparency, showing the real you, not some weak imitation, not something that you'd like some weird combination of Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, and Gandhi, but the real you that people see to some extent in any event. And then thirdly, really being of service, really putting that as a theme of your leadership. We talk a lot about empathy these days. Can you really empathize with another person? I think leaders often mistake it with having a good relationship with people, liking other people. And it's not simply understanding what it must be like to be that person. If you have the gift of empathy, you really almost can be that person. Great leaders who are emotionally mature can actually, in their minds, be that other person. They can think what they think. You can suspend your own thoughts. Can you think what they think? Can you feel what they feel? Can you dream what they dream? This is empathy. This is empathy at its very core definition. Can you really be of service? Is it not? We talk a lot about servant leadership these days, but is it at the core of why you do what you do? As Woodrow Wilson said, you are not here to make a living. You are here to enable the world to live more amply, with greater vision, and with a finer spirit of hope and achievement. You are here to enrich the world. You impoverish yourself if you forget this errand. You impoverish yourself if you forget this errand. Leaders today who do not see themselves as there to serve the organization, serve the people with whom they work, serve their constituents, serve their customers, I believe are leaders that are destined for the scrap heap. So what can you do? What are the practices of extraordinary leaders in terms of making these connections? Number 1, see life through their eyes. Get present with them. Time is such a valuable commodity these days. There's so much trying to get at us all day long. How often do we ever really stop and give somebody else not just our time, but our presence? When you're with them, you are totally present. We are very transparent, and people know if we are present or we're thinking about the last email we sent and what the response was going to be to that email. Number 2, open yourself up. And I'm not saying being irresponsible about that, but people want to see the real you. Share yourself with others. And lastly, make a habit of first seeking to serve. This idea of service and sacrifice, I believe, it's going to be the mantra of the successful leaders of our next generation. And lastly, influencing others. How do we really influence others on the broader scale within our organization? Optimism, confidence, and inspiration. Moods simply matter. We are always, as leaders, under the magnifying glass in our organizations. And I believe that the moods that we enter the system with, enter the organization, enter our teams with, are infectious. I think we have a huge impact, and through choosing our mood. The big idea here is we can choose to walk in the light, or we can choose to walk in the dark. We can choose to be optimistic, or we can choose to be pessimistic. If you look at this idea of pessimism, many would say, well, that's realistic. It is a pessimistic view is realistic. I would suggest that we also cannot move our organizations ahead, that if we do not salt our optimism with confidence as well. We need to find ways to demonstrate confidence in the organization, confidence in the team, confidence in others, and confidence in ourselves as leaders. One of the many ways you can define leadership, and there's many wonderful definitions out there written by great researchers and authors. I will tell you the one that speaks most loudly to me these days is this one, and I'll admit that I like it because I wrote it. Leadership, at its core, is an invitation to a tomorrow that is better than today. Leadership, at its core, is an invitation to a tomorrow that is better than today. Now, when we ask ourselves this question, are we asserting this every day when we walk into the organization? Is every conversation we have with somebody an invitation to a tomorrow that is better than today? If our mood is based on this is a positive, confident, optimistic mood that invades the organization. This is how we have power in the organization when we show up. We simply show up with our presence. So what do extraordinary leaders do to really be a powerful influence in the organization? Well, they're always telling the team story. They're creating an exciting future. They're always talking about what the story is, where we're going, how we're going to get there, what waits for us around the corner, what waits for us at the top of the hill. They really focus on the strengths of others. They hunt out talent wherever they can find it in the organization. And lastly, it's not just their cheerleaders. They celebrate every breakthrough. They energize their teams by celebrating the wins along the way. No project is completed without landmines, without blockages, without disappointments. And it's a big role of the leader is to energize the team as they go up that hill. So I have a question for you in this in the closing moments here. What if your LEQ score was actually on your resume? What if when we were interviewing people, we didn't look so much at their education, their experiences, their references, but there was one number at the top of their resume, and it gave them an LEQ score of some that described the quality, the extent of their leadership emotional intelligence. My guess is that you and me and most of us on the call would look at that number and would give that a high value in making the decision to hire somebody. If we really knew that somebody could come into the organization and be a positive influence on others, somebody would come into the organization and have very profound relationships with other people and be able to be an influence on them, on their career and in their work, and somebody who was not dissuaded by minor setbacks, and somebody who wouldn't blow up when people came to them with emotionally charged issues, people that would keep a steady hand on the tiller, would we not hire them? Well, as we mentioned earlier, you do have an opportunity to have your LEQ score here, and Julie's going to give you that information here in just a moment. The good news about this thing called LEQ is it can be readily increased. Most researchers will tell us that our IQ is ours for life. We might be able to boot it up a little bit through study, maybe through exercise, maybe through foods, but I can tell you any change we make in our IQ is incremental. LEQ can be dramatically increased. Again, I like Daniel Goleman's definition here. Emotional intelligence is not fixed genetically, nor does it develop only in early childhood. Emotional intelligence seems to be largely learned, and it continues to develop as we go through life and learn from our experiences. So how can leaders accelerate their LEQ? How can they accelerate the development of their LEQ? 4 ways. Number 1, have a theme of becoming increasingly more self-aware. I would suggest that you ask yourself this one question at the end of every day. What did I learn about myself today? What did I learn about myself today? Number 2, learn to master your own emotions right in the moment. The beauty of this is you have an opportunity to do this many, many times through the course of the day. If it is indeed true that we're always under the influence of emotions to some degree, we have a constant tutorial going on in our heads that will teach us about our emotions. And number 3, practice making deep connections every day. Again, we have an opportunity to work with people, to connect with people, both inside and outside our organizations. Every time we have a choice as to whether or not we are really going to empathize with them, whether or not we're going to be responsibly transparent with them, and whether or not we are going to find a way to serve them in some way. This is the habit of a deep connection. And number 4, simply making the habit of being confident and optimistic. Again, this is not being Pollyanna-like. This is making a habit of seeing the best in others and inviting people to a tomorrow that is better than today in some way. LEQ simply increases with experience, discipline, and self-honesty. Every person on this call is likely going to have a higher LEQ next year than you do right now. It's a natural thing occurs as we set out to work in organizations every day. The interesting thing is that we can allow that to progress, or we can choose to accelerate that progression. Many times it involves us what we call scraping off the old paint. Before you can launch into some new endeavor about accelerating your leadership intelligence, I would encourage you to reflect first on those areas that are holding you back. The things in your interactions with other people, your self-view, your view of leadership, your view of your own future, your experience, the story that you're carrying with you, maybe that needs to change in some way. I would also encourage you to look at this idea of leadership emotional intelligence as a source of making a major shift in your personal development. It's a bold shift. The challenge here is that this bold step in developing yourself as a leader is likely to be a bold step to develop the leader within.